All right, we will get into the podcast this week on the 1982 movie Blade Runner. And here to discuss the film with me, I have Claire and Rob. Thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I'm very excited. Yeah.
I'm glad to have you here. So, before we jump into what I think will be a very interesting discussion on some very interesting themes in this film, I'm going to do just a quick recap for anyone who maybe hasn't seen this in a bit, and then we'll jump right in. So, Blade Runner is a retelling of the Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was released in 1968. The film was directed by Ridley Scott, the same director as films like Alien, Gladiator, Hannibal, among others. The movie was not a real success in the box office, making $41 million off a $30 million budget, though I will say it's rated highly by most film critics, from lists, and it's become quite a classic over the years. The movie is set in 2019 Los Angeles. We have former police officer Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, brought into the fray back where he used to work at a police station to eliminate or retire several androids that have made their way back to Earth from a colony off planet. So he's tasked with this specialized unit known as a Blade Runner to retire each of these by specialized testing to determine, if they are in fact replicants or androids, and then finally retire them. Of course, complications arise. He ends up receiving some assistance from a replicant who works for the very same company that built them, the Tyrell Corporation. And so we follow Deckard as he tracks them down, ultimately succeeding. But does he, in fact, keep his own humanity throughout the process? So maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe not necessarily in humanity, but as far as this movie being 40 years old, hard to believe, and written even earlier, do you think that the movie still has, I guess, relevance, or does it feel like it's too dated despite I think the themes intertwined in it?
I think it holds up. Um, of course, I'm coming at it from like a perspective of like the special effects side of it. Like it was revolutionary at the time, and it still holds up. Like it's got one of the biggest miniature sets I think ever used. But also the themes are super relevant right now. Like it's the hyper consumerism and capitalism and corporate takeover and corporations running the world. We've got issues of policing and how that's executed now. Like I think it holds up.
Hmm. I think as ethics, ethically, like in terms of the ethics involved and the philosophy involved, I think it is rather timeless. And what is it to be a human, right? What is it to hurt another human being? So I think it holds up. And when it first started, my first thought was, wow, this is holding up pretty good just as a movie. Beyond all that,
Yeah, I agree. I think that both of you said, Claire, as far as the themes in there, I think are very relevant today, even more so probably than it was when it came out in the 80s, as we're kind of seeing the, beginning of neoliberal, hyper capitalism and the whole thing. But yeah, I think that the movie gives you a lot of, visually the movie is awesome. Like you said, I think there's no question about that. I think we'll get through some of the plot, of course, but I don't want to, just so I'm not harping on this too much. Have either of you read the book, the source material?
no.
I read it years ago. I used to be really into Philip K. Dick and all that kind of sci-fi as a genre when I was a teenager, but it's been a few years.
Okay. The only reason I was just curious if I don't want to, I don't like doing too much comparison because I think the movie in this case is much different than the book. It's a different feel, so I won't really bring too much into it. But there'll be a few areas where I might just add like a little note to it. But I think this might be a good place to start since you both mentioned sort of the hyper capitalism and consumerism. And so, visually, the very first shot is, zooming in on Los Angeles, theoretically, what was 4 years ago, 2019. But you still have this mega city. You still have advertisements everywhere, Coca-Cola, banners and everything. So I think the foreshadowing, even in 1968 when this book was written, and then the movie in 1982, it was clearly on Ridley Scott's mind, the idea of what he thought it would look like, in 40 years.
So what's interesting about that is the LA and the film specifically is based off of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong looks like that. I worked there for several months a few years ago, and it feels and looks like Hong Kong because that's exactly what it's based off of. They have like the giant advertisements, it's like the animated advertisements, like the one with the woman that I can't remember what she's advertising specifically, but they have those all over the city. They have those on buses driving around.
I was going to say the first line, the first scene is some like line explaining, the setting right away. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but when I read that, my first thought was, oh, this isn't about wage labor. This is about slavery, right? And then almost immediately you see these pyramids, right? And the first scene when they're in the Tyrell Corp or something, and like the sun is shining, and it gave this very like Egyptian pharaoh setting to the whole thing. And my thought was, oh, this is about slave labor. This is not about wage labor, and how in the future, and as you said about Ridley Scott, this is what he thinks the future is going to look like. He's headed to a slave society, back to a slave society, we should say.
Yeah, that's true. I should have brought up the scrolling text, but you're right. The kind of the subtext of it is that the planet is dying. There's clearly it's more explicit in the book that it's, from, war.
It's a nuclear war.
Right, exactly. Like you notice in the movie, there's never any sun for the most part. Like the sky is always dark. It's clearly, you have to sort of, except for at the Tyrell Corporation where they're able to capture this from whatever their, the method, like the room is very sunny, which I think is also visually great. But you're right, though. They've now gone off planet because of the catastrophe that's led to variety of the downfall of, the world. And so they're going off planet. And these replicants are being given to you as a personal slave when you go off planet. Like that's the direct thing. Mm-hmm. And so, and I know I mentioned the capitalist aspect, but I mean, slavery and capitalism go together like peanut butter and jelly. I mean, you don't have our wealth of the wealth that was created without slavery, and you won't probably be able to continue it without slavery. Like we're literally putting kids back to work in Arkansas. There's now a bill to let 14-year-olds now be wage slaves. So yeah, that's a lot, but I don't know.
I know it wasn't necessarily the intention of either Philip K. Dick or Ridley Scott, but the first thing that came to mind with me reading that scroll was actually the exploitation of migrant workers and Blade Runners as the slave patrols.
Yeah.
Just I don't know, just looking at it, I guess through a different lens that it was intended, because the book was originally meant to be a condemnation of eugenics, but the themes of it are just so broad that they can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned eugenics. I was having a back and forth with someone on TikTok about the movie Idiocracy and the idea of eugenics in that. But I think for this movie, I think this kind of combines the two pieces. So you have the Tyrell Corporation, which, as you mentioned, Rob, is like this towering, massive complex of buildings above the city, almost kind of controlling the city. We don't see it as much in the movie, but it's clear that corporations control society in some sense, and they basically conscript the police to act as their, the same thing they are now is the protecting the property of the elite, of the capitalist class. And so this colonization and expansionism, it feels very much like now where you are, rather than fixing the problems of our own society, they're just like, yep, we're just gonna slip off to Mars and have some, mine the lithium or whatever there.
and everybody's left. There, there was no, and I don't know how often I see it in movies, really, if I think about it, but there really was no wage labor, and all of you saw this like small scale barter, selling your own personal wares, right, on the street or something like that, and you never, and so it was all very like this bazaar in a trading bazaar that you would see, and there's no like the corporation is somewhere else, right? And the actual on the ground where people are walking around, it's not there except for the police, right?
Right.
I think at least it's my interpretation, at least with one of the replicants that gets hunted down, that she appears to be engaged in some kind of sex work as like part of her cover for being on the earth. So at least that still exists. But otherwise, I think you're right. There's not a whole lot of wage labor left.
Yeah, there's sex services, right?
And actually, the only people you see other than like the bizarre trading kind of thing that are engaged in any kind of, I would call it some kind of commerce, are people who work for the Tyrell Corporation. You have the man in sort of the room that's very cold, building the eyes. You have the guy in the building, right? So you're not. Everyone is essentially enriching the Tyrell Corporation so they can continue their process on Earth to feed the off-world, and that was the one thing too. Like they have an announcement at the beginning of the movie, I think, as they're introducing it, saying like you can go off-world. They called it like they didn't call it the Wild West. What is the quote that she says? I thought it was interesting.
Like the land of opportunity, golden land of opportunity.
Yes, and so they're kind of selling this idea of Western expansion, from 2 centuries ago, and you get your slave, and then you can. It's funny in the book, as I just mentioned, they don't let people leave Earth if they're basically have an IQ test that's too low. So if you're not smart, you don't get to go. They call you a special.
There's also the medical issues.
Yes.
If you have any medical issues, you can't go.
They want healthy people and healthy bodies.
Similar to a lot of immigration standards.
Yeah. So this is maybe one thing that's a little bit more like in the weeds, if you will. So I was reading another book that talks about postmodernism and this movie in conjunction to one. Like it's a sort of a theory driven book. The book is kind of dry and it's not the best book in general, but the style of the movie, and I feel like it's maybe worth mentioning. I know we kind of talked briefly about the consumerism, but I think it's worth talking about more is sort of we're at the point of like ultimate consumerism where, we're like you even said, Rob, like we're not even selling wage labor anymore. We're almost beyond that. Like they're still advertising Coca-Cola. And so obviously you're buying from corporations, but it's like everyone who's left is just kind of living for themselves. Like there's no system or structure left. And I think that's the idea of sort of this post-modern capitalist system is this, society that is just kind of without any real, what's the word even, structure or, a soul, or that's not the really, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know if
there is this line, and it's a bit trite, but it jumped right out at me because it's so obvious. If you're not a cop, you're little people, right? And then Harrison Ford said something like, "So I got no choice, huh?" Right? And it's that you're either a cop or you're either part of Tyrell Corporation, or you're nobody, or you're selling noodles, on the street, or you're selling your body or something like that.
Yeah, I took note of that line too. I found it interesting that he clearly had retired or quit, but he's no longer he's not able to. I mean, that's the thing too. Is like they show some apartments in this, like his own apartment. It seems decent enough, generally, but clearly money is still necessary. to live in some sense.
There was hold on, let me find. It was plenty of rooms for everybody. Something like that when the woman replicant is like hiding in the trash and meets Sebastian. I'm not good with names.
Oh yeah, J.F. Sebastian.
J.F. Sebastian,
and
right?
Like,
and
yeah, he says there's no housing shortage here.
There's no housing shortage, and all I could think was, well, yeah, there may be rooms, but how do you get a room anywhere, you know? And they don't mention that. There's no mention of that, of how you would pay for a room.
Yeah, in the book, they actually bring this up a bunch, is that all of the apartment buildings are like empty. There's no one really left. And I wish they had kind of touched on that more, because I think that's an important thing, is that there isn't, like, there's this gigantic city, Hong Kong, LA, you know, whatever it's meant to be like, but it's not like a bustling, it's like a shell. It's like a remnant of the past, right? It's this mega city that no longer is relevant, because to succeed now you have to leave, or you can stay and suffer.
Is there mention of? Go ahead.
Oh, it's not that important. I was just going to say, I think it's an interesting dichotomy of the reality of Hong Kong, which it's based off of. I mean, it is supposed to be LA, but it's based off of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has this high housing density. It's a very, very densely populated city, and then to have this version of Los Angeles that's based off of that city be supposed to be so empty. I don't know. I feel like there's some more deeper meaning there, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It was just something that I thought about.
Is there mention in the book of like global population? Because when I'm watching this movie, I get the sense of density, and you're on the street and there's people everywhere, but then you go into Sebastian's house and it's vast and open and empty. And I'm wondering if there's population. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they don't really mention population. They do talk about how, so in the book, there's like the dust that's covering everything, to the point of like you can't, like, it just creates this residue of, you know, I guess the fallout and everything. So the people have really bad health. People are dying. The people who I guess were rich enough to withstand it, you know, they had some home or some fancy place to live. The people who actually lived in these buildings, these fancy high rises, they left, right? They're now on Mars. And the people who were scraping by now are, you know, kind of usurping these remnants of former glory, is kind of the way I would take it.
Makes sense. I got the impression that like Tyrell himself just never leaves his house.
Golden Palace, almost literally.
Yeah,
he did live in like this, you know, he has these fancy, you know, shades that can close and all of that. The only other thing I was going to mention about the capitalism piece too. I don't think I had anything there. You know, so I think we should talk about the androids and like the humanity aspect, because I think that's kind of like the driver of the movie, you know.
Yeah, what makes a person a person.
Right, like what makes a person, exactly. And so Harrison Ford's Deckard character is kind of brought back in because he's good at this job. He didn't want to do it. He bring him back. And I find like in the book, they go through more of the questions they ask the replicants. I think they're interesting. And it's supposed to be that basically animals are virtually extinct for the most part. There's only a few animals that are left. I don't know what people are eating. They don't really talk about that either. Eating synthetic, vegetarian, soy, I don't know. But animals are mostly gone. And there's this dichotomy of, you know, you're not human because you don't have empathy. And I feel like that's such a interesting thought. Like, so, but there's many humans that don't have empathy for the poor, the working class, the disabled, you name it. So I don't know what people think of. What do you guys think about that?
I actually had a couple of notes on that, because I know that is like the entire basis of trying to separate the replicants from the humans. But it's also very clear that replicants do feel empathy, especially for each other. Like, you see that repeatedly throughout the film, in the way that they care for each other and how they're affected when one of them dies. And yet we see the humans displaying lack of empathy for the replicants, and vice versa. Like, it's very interesting that the empathy seems to really only exist for their own demographic group and not for the other.
The first break that I saw in Deckard was when Rachel shows up at his house and she's just learned that she's a replicant, and she starts to cry, and you can see Deckard break in a way that has shifted his worldview slightly. And the note I took was you cannot watch another human being cry and not see yourself in that, right? And that's the first time, and I feel like his growth into what turned into some bullshit love, they started there.
I have thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and they make it even more. It's more obvious in the book where he like has this flip where I think they do a good job. I think it's more like subtext a little bit in the movie. I think that's the scene you're talking about, Rob, when sees Rachel. I agree, and I think he realizes he still has to go back and kill the one he didn't get, and he's struggling with his own humanity, and what was I going to say about it? I guess just in the book that they make it more obvious that he's having second thoughts. He doesn't think he can do this job anymore, and I think they don't do quite enough, I feel like, to do it. They kind of had to bring in the second half of the movie that's about halfway through. He has to get through it. He has to struggle through it, and I think he does. I don't know.
No, go ahead.
I agree with what you're saying about that part, but it's been a while since I've rewatched this movie, and I realized this second time around when I was watching it last night that there's something wildly uncomfortable about the scene where Deckard kisses Rachel, and she's obviously not into it, and there's already that existing treatment of women as objects, but it's just extra icky because you're is he even viewing her as a person right now, or is she just a replicant to him, an object to take possession over in this extra way?
I mean, he's forcing himself. He's raping her. I mean, it's kind of hard not to say that. Yeah, it's pretty.
And then, I mean, we see that kind of trope in movies all the time anyway, without the added layer of her being a synthetic person. But it just my skin crawled for the first time watching that movie because I never had put that together before.
Oh.
I've always just watched it as a movie that I enjoy, and then looking at it with a critical lens, I was just ugh.
The note I wrote for that was violent, unconsenting kiss. straight up, and then to turn it into tell me to kiss you, right? And tell me this, and then finally she says, finally she says, okay, touch me. After violence and commands, and I mean, it was astounding. And I know
he's subjugating her
from a man whose entire job is to hunt down creatures like her.
Yeah.
And she knows this. When he goes to Tyrell Corporation, she asked him, do you ever accidentally kill? She thought she was a human at this point, so that's kind of her reason for asking, is that have you ever accidentally killed a person? And there's actually, it's interesting. I'd seen this movie before, so I knew kind of the ending, and it's not ambiguous. But I feel like if you had never seen this movie before and you're kind of watching it, is there ever a thought in your mind where you're thinking, is Deckard a human?
That's actually intentional. That little question is actually an intentional plot point. Is wondering whether or not.
So that's clearly that's an intentional aspect of it, is to.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense, because I feel like it's hard not to have that idea, right?
Well, the whole concept of it is and I feel not that we're talking about the sequel or anything like that. I feel that actually played further into the sequel, 2047, where the Blade Runner actually is a replicant.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the idea,
But
I mean, again, to not to mention to go into the sequel, but it's almost like, can you really have a human do this job? And I think the answer is probably no.
not without causing extensive psychological damage. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I also view this as like a critiquing on policing.
Yes,
Just
I
in
have a
general.
whole, yeah, I have some notes on that.
Oh, the scene when he shoots the woman like in the mall or something, and what I wrote down was he kills with absolute impunity, with no thought whatsoever, and everybody just kind of stands there, and then magically the cop shows up and they take away the body or whatever. But it was like nobody protested anything. He had no fear whatsoever to just shoot this. They don't know that it's a replicant. They don't know that he's a Blade Runner, right? And he just shoots this person and nobody does anything, barely even looks shocked.
One of my notes I had on that actually is because I've been reading about like the LA cop gangs. Like that's what that made me think of with the Blade Runners, is like the LA cop gangs that just basically go around like committing extreme atrocities against the people of Los Angeles for like cool points and tattoos and shit.
Yeah, but you are right though. Violence is no longer really, it doesn't seem to bother people. Like you've and I think, I don't know if this is an intentional. I just thought of this now. It's almost just the idea of people are like desensitized to the violence we see on TV, to the point of, like, you can't, it's hard to get outraged about things anymore unless it's super
really
egregious.
Extreme. Yeah.
I don't know where that fits in, but I think,
I think it's extremely apropos because we see that right now with like we have constant school shootings, we have constant police killings, and at a certain point you're like, oh, it's another one. Oh, all right, well it's Tuesday.
Right. Oh, and so I want to bring up another quote, a line from when they go to the Tyrell Corporation, because I think there's still some interesting things about the humanity aspect. Is the Tyrell, when they're asking about, Rachel has been given this test, the Voight Comp test. She leaves the room and he's talking to Mr. Tyrell. I can't think of his first name now. And he says that commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto. And I feel like that's like, could be like the tagline, like for the movie, like that's, or just capitalism, that's the goal, is simply to create something that's so great that you need it.
Yeah, I love the phrase "more human than human," because there's this. It's like love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru, right? There's something, right? There's something. There is something about the thing that we love, that is not expressed in the thing unless you add this commercial aspect, unless it is this thing that you need to buy, right? It's not just a Subaru. We here at Subaru have added love to the Subaru, and now it's this thing that you need, right? More human than human. Well, what the hell do you actually mean? Well, we have added something that you now need for it to
replicants
to
now
buy.
With extra human.
Yeah, right.
Well, and that's the thing about them too. Is, so we didn't mention this too. So early when Decker is kind of recruited in, his boss is telling him about each of the different replicants he has to catch, and he's kind of talking about them, and he mentions like that Zora, which is the woman who worked at the theater with the snakes and gets shot in the mall. They refer to her as a woman that's used for like killing off Earth. So she's basically like a not a bounty hunter.
She's an assassin.
Assassin. And the Priss, who's the other woman who is in the gets found in like the garbage area and ends up befriending the other person in the building. She was just listed as like a pleasure model. There is no
basic pleasure model.
Pleasure model. So she's just a sex worker, for people on Mars. Like she's just an object to them. So
Mhm.
I guess the idea of more human to human almost is like for that aspect is we have to make her more
Can
human
we
than us, so you don't feel weird about having sex with her.
can we talk
I
about
don't
how they
know.
also call them skin jobs?
Yeah.
Yes, that is
Like,
a weird term.
I just like looking at it from like just a current societal perspective. Like, there's so much language about them that is specifically dehumanizing. Like, I see a lot of similarities in the way that black men were talked about in, well, I would say in past times, but let's be fucking real. But like talking about how they have superhuman strength, but they're actually subhuman because
Yeah.
the replicants are all designed. They're like basically they're like a cyborg. So they've got like android components, but also wetware, and they're supposed to be like have superior agility and strength, and their intellect is like on par with the people that designed them, but they're still subhuman.
Yeah.
So like it just reminded me of like, oh, you know, black men are super strong, they're really great workers, but oh, they're below us.
More human than human, in fact, means not something other than human, right?
Human like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, but that's a good point about how because they're using them as assassins, but they're also like they're slaves. Like they were basically. I mean, initially it
Yeah.
seems like they created a less intelligent version of this. This is like the new version of the model. That presumably the older version were just built for strength, built for just going to Mars. They would
Manual
didn't
labor.
die. Exactly, manual labor, and but at the same time, you also have to dehumanize them. Otherwise, you would feel bad. The people going there would feel bad about making these
That empathy
humanoids
again.
doing.
It'll get you.
Yeah, it's the um. But I think
I,
that going back to something you said, Rob, is you said that they become empathetic, and part of the idea is that they only can live for 4 years, which in the book is more explicit that it's a program. Whereas I feel like in the movie, don't they kind of allude to like genetically that's just how
Yes.
long they
It's in the
last?
movie. It's a genetic component that shortens their lifespan so that their emotions don't become too unstable. And Rachel is a model where they started implanting memories to quote unquote cushion her emotions because
But I
the original. Sorry, I'm
oh
under.
no, that's okay. I was just gonna say I mean that makes sense, and I think that's I almost feel like the idea that them last they had to make it a genetic trait because if they're just deciding that they like are destroyed after 4 years, like they just shut down, it's like it tells me that they're worried that they become like humans. They
human,
learn empathy.
yes,
I'm sure that's part of
exactly.
it.
More human than human, but we stop them before they actually become human.
Yes,
Well,
we yeah.
there's a flip side to that because I also feel like Blade Runner suffers from what I call the very reasonable MCU villain problem, where they've got a really fucking valid point. Like their whole motivation is super valid, so we've got to make them incredibly cruel and over the top so that we don't start sympathizing with them too much.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah, that's interesting.
they're fighting for their own liberation because they're being treated as slaves, they're being treated as less than human, which is super fucking valid. So we've got to see Roy Batty being completely unhinged and sadistic towards all of these other characters. Otherwise, we might feel bad for him.
I was so mad at myself watching fucking Harrison Ford and like identifying with that character. Right? I know I'm telling you, I noticed it throughout the whole movie. I'm watching it and I'm like, and I know that they were trying to put in my brain, oh, this is the character that you were supposed to identify with. And it infuriated me because it was working.
So Roy Batty has a quote that I wrote down it's right before the iconic "Tears in the Rain" monologue, and it's like right before the whole chase scene, and it's as Harrison Ford's like shooting at him, and he says, "I thought you were supposed to be good. Aren't you the good man?" And I was just like, ah.
Yeah, it's interesting about the way that I feel like Hollywood in general in a lot of settings creates like the villain, like in this movie, you're right. Like how are we not to look at the replicants leaving Mars as like as a revolution? or like like an uprising of like a revolt for being
Well, and
slaves.
they even phrased it specifically as a bloody mutiny.
Right. They have to say it's a
Which is
mutiny.
deliberate. It's such deliberate phrasing so that it doesn't legitimize it.
And so you're meant to immediately feel angry at them because they killed some civilians, right? Like that's
right.
They mentioned that multiple times. Like they killed some civilians on this ship.
They captured a ship and slaughtered the crew. Yeah. And yeah, like we see very specific points in there too, where the replicants are being deliberately cruel to quote unquote innocent characters, like with J.F. Sebastian. Like you see it multiple times. You'll see like that really cold look flash across Chris's face, and you'll see like the knowing look between her and Roy Batty, and it's designed to, well, to have you stop feeling so empathetic for them.
There's when Sebastian, I don't know the main bad person's name, but whatever. When they give him, they're in the elevator and they're doing the chess calls, and they bring him in, and the replicant tells J.F. Sebastian, stay or something, gives him a command. And I thought, wow, that's a switch. Now here's this replicant who is now ordering this human around in order to go kill this other human. The roles have switched here. And when he said stay, and then he just stayed there, I thought that was significant in terms of this person's understanding of their own power. And what does it mean to be human? Well, it means power over humans, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was giving him, I mean, I guess it's saying that there is some like equal, like we shouldn't be viewing the replicants as this subspecies. They've grown to the point where they deserve our, I know, empathy, which I think is like the whole thing, you know, like they're not empathetic, right? So we have to kill them, or that's why they're not human, because they're not empathetic.
They're monsters because they don't have empathy, therefore we shouldn't care about them. J.F. Sebastian's an interesting one though too, in that because he's the one that's brought up with Tyrell, because he specifically says when he's introducing himself to Chris that he doesn't have friends and he makes them. So he's like a toy maker, and he's basically making all of these replicants that we see in his apartment. So I think it's possible that he views the replicants differently because of what he chooses to surround himself with. So he has developed that empathy for them.
Yeah. I could see that.
Yeah, I think that's made very clear that when he's like asleep or something and she walks up and smells him, and then he's like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. That whole scene, you could sense that this character respected them more than anyone else in the film so far.
Absolutely.
And then it's sad that he got killed by a replicant. You didn't deserve that.
Well, again, can't have you feeling sorry for the replicants. Got to show that they're bad, evil.
Well, okay. So, and then and I hate to go there and use this term, right? But obviously, because all Hollywood is, but this turns into liberal propaganda, right? Where you have, I'm sorry, I hate to go there, right?
No, you're right.
Please.
You have this obviously bad Tyrell Corporation, right? And then you have these obviously bad replicants who lose their minds and murder humans. And then you have our main character in the center who's conflicted and, oh, are they all just as bad? You know, there's good on both sides, there's bad on both sides. The main character here is this centrist position, when it seems very obvious to me that humans are hurting these other sentient beings here.
100%. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, all cops are bastards. It includes Rick Deckard.
It absolutely does. Well, this is the thing that I see now. Like I picture this like almost as like, you know, like the Matrix. Like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like like when I watch movies now, a lot of movies, not every movie, but movies I see a lot of times that have this sense of like anti-capitalist thought to it. Like it's meant to invoke like anti-capitalist ideas, but there's never a solution that is provided. It's like, oh, well, this is the thing that's kind of bad, but we're kind of stuck with it. So you
Yeah.
just have to suffer. And I feel like in this movie, the conflict, like you said, is is it the Tyrell Corporation that's the bad guy, or is it the bad guy, you know, that they've created in this movie? And
Mhm.
they don't offer any kind of, I don't expect a solution in Blade Runner, to be clear. Like I don't anticipate Ridley Scott to make a movie like that, but I think it's interesting nonetheless that they don't even come to a conclusion about these replicants, right? Like it's very much until it's, you know, there's sequels, but
There's extended lore, actually.
What'd you say? Extended lore about Blade
There's
Runner?
extended lore about the Blade Runner universe. I'm a huge nerd.
Yeah.
I did a lot of reading last night. But yeah, like there's extended lore about it, and like they even go in to talk about how like the later Nexus models up to the Nexus 9 can't be identified by the Voight-Kampf test anymore. So they're basically virtually indistinguishable from humans by the time they get to the Nexus 9.
There's a line I was going to bring up. I can't find. I thought I had written it down, and this is. I know we kind of like skipped around to some different scenes, but I want to talk about the like I guess the final two scenes I think are worth talking about. First, when he finally goes to the apartment where I'm blanking. The apartment where he's now tracking down both the other Blade Runners at the end, and they're on the roof after he's kind of, Roy is kind of toying with Decker. Like it's clear that he is superior. And there's a line on the roof where I feel like he mentions maybe someone.
Was it the living in fear? That's what it means to be a slave?
Yes, that is a line.
It's such a good
And
line.
it's funny. I have the script open, but I can't find like it's either like not the right version or like it's whatever it is. It is. Oh, it says, but this is how it's to be a slave, the future sealed off. No, whatever. You had the line, and so it's I guess it's a powerful line. I feel like that's like the most, to me, it's one of the most powerful lines in the movie. Like a perfect scene too.
I feel, if I recall correctly, Leon, the other replicant, says something very similar when he's kicking the shit out of Deckard in the street. I don't remember exactly what it says, but it was something along
painful to
those
live in
lines.
fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that the one you're talking about? He says it's painful to live in fear, isn't it?
It's something like that, but it was a very similar sentiment that was then again echoed by Roy Batty there towards the end.
Yeah, so here's the line. It says, "Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave." And I think that would easily perceive, these slaves in colonies off planet. It's the same that you saw in, colonization by the British, Americans, you pick a country, pick a colonizer, and that's what those people were living in fear.
I think, and I heard that line, and I see that both of you really liked that line. So I'm sorry to go here. I rolled my eyes a little bit because
I gotta go.
Yeah, right. Because the more efficient form of slavery comes without fear, right? The drugged society, the placated society, the bread and circus society, right? That is a more efficient form of slavery. And if your slaves have fear, that is much more dangerous for the slave masters, right? And so I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit at that line because I didn't quite I wasn't feeling that line. I'm sorry.
I see your point, but I would argue that specifically in U.S. society, that fear is a huge motivating factor towards keeping wage slaves because people are constantly living in fear that they're going to lose their job and therefore their place to live, their health insurance, and that's what keeps them going back and unable to engage in political protest and anything to change the system.
But let's be honest, I'm drunk. I'm not all that afraid. I just go home and get drunk at night, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think
because I'm afraid, but still.
I think both things can be true.
I mean, I think you could be afraid of what you're talking about, afraid of losing your job, being, you know, without a house, without, you know, living on the street. But I feel like it's there's different, as this is like, I feel like this is, I'm sliding in and like trying to create like a middle position here, but it's like there's like different kinds of fear. I feel like that you can probably say, and I think the overarching fear, I think, is right. Like you said, Rob, I think it's that you are, if you're afraid, you're more likely to act out. But I think that people, especially in the US and the imperial core, are afraid, but they're also afraid to do something.
Yeah.
I think they see, you know, violence against them.
Yeah.
I think the line was a true statement, but I think that it was too easy to, and I think it was too easy to say is all. But yeah. I think it was true.
Well, and I think it's probably, given the kind of movie this is, that's like the best you're gonna get, kind of sense.
Yeah, right.
Like that's, you know, like it's you know, it's an action movie, you know, sci-fi kind of thing, and I guess I'll take what I can kind of get, you know, I am from that, but so there's the only other sort of theme that we talked about a lot, like the slavery and the replicants and the empathy. And so one thing that we didn't maybe talk about too, and maybe we did, well, maybe we did, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the motives of Deckard, he's motivated because they basically told him he has no choice. But
you're either a cop or you're one of the little people.
Right. And so is that the idea that there's still very much, obviously, a class structure in this society? You have the corporation Tyrell, and you have the people who work for them, and then you basically have everyone else is just a, you know, I don't know if I could call them working class anymore, because I don't know. Maybe the question I have is how you see like the class structure in the society.
I think that there's definitely a wealth disparity. I don't know. I don't feel like it's very well fleshed out in the movie. And again, it's been a very long time since I read the book, but like it's very, very plain that Tyrell has a ton of money. Like it's referenced with the owl that they have, and it's never really specifically explained whether or not that's a real owl or not, only that Rachel says it's very expensive, and we see later on that normal people can't afford real animals.
Mm-hmm.
So there is definitely a wealth structure of some kind. I'm just not 100% clear on what it is.
Yeah, you don't even really see it. You see Tyrell, who is obviously the richest fucking man on earth, and then you see poor people, and then cops enforcing it all. But there really is no, there, you can't even say there's two classes. There's the underclass, and then there's Tyrell. As far as the movie's concerned, you're not exposed to anything in the middle.
I think what you're meant to perceive, maybe, I mean, I don't know if the average maybe person watching, but the people who have gone off planet to colonize Mars would strike me as been like, you know, petty bourgeoisie who've now started over, and now they can recreate their structure somewhere else.
Right.
Sure.
The thing about the animals is much more explicit in the book. Like that's like the plot of the whole thing. Deckard wants a sheep, like a real sheep or a real animal, and he eventually does get one, and Rachel kills it, which is like this weird scene. Like that's the, you know, they have fake animals and real animals. You can get an owl that's a robot, an android, and then you can get an actual animal, but it's very expensive. And they all carry around like a book that tells them the price of animals like that very week. It's really quite weird. And I'm kind of glad they didn't keep that in the movie. I think would detract perhaps.
when Decker's talking to Zora and he's asking her if her snake is real, she's like, "What do you think? If I made that kind of money to have a real snake, I'd be working here."
Right. Right.
So
that
that's
tells me
at
the
least
owl was
reference.
real.
Yes. Although, and this was actually another thing I wrote down because it ties into a little bit more of like the subhumanization of the replicants. I don't know if this is specific to the remastered final cut, but they've added eye shine to a lot of different characters. So eye shine is like at night when you see an animal's eyes reflect in the dark. And they use that with the replicants specifically, that their eyes do this shine in the dark. Because humans' eyes don't naturally do that. We don't have the requisite membrane for that to happen. So that was like, it's just another way of showing, oh, like they're just another animal. But then going back to the owl also has that eye shine. So it's kind of, it adds to that question of whether or not it's real or if it's an artificial animal.
God, that's interesting. I noticed the eye shine and it stuck in my mind, but I didn't know enough to consider it significant, but I knew there was something there.
It is,
they showed it. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, there's it's mostly nocturnal animals that have that, and it helps them with it's mostly carnivorous predator animals that have it, and it's so that they can see their prey better in the dark. It's a membrane on the eye that gives light a second chance to reflect back into the lens to process the image. There's some prey animals that have it too, but it's mostly like nocturnal animals.
Well, it makes perfect sense that the replicants would have this, given they don't seem to need to sleep. But I mean, maybe they do sleep, but it's not.
I think there's actually a shot of Zora, like when he's doing like the enhance on the photo.
Oh,
I think that's a photo of her sleeping. But it would be an evolutionary advantage on, I'm sure, some of these off-world colonies, because who knows what the light is like there.
Right. I was just thinking that they would, having them be able to do things at night when other people can't, like make them do the graveyard shift of whatever their shitty ass tasks are on Mars and all of that. That's interesting. I also noticed the eye thing, and I had no idea. I think it's in the final cut version, which I think is the one that's on.
It's the one that's on Hulu. It's the one that I watched.
Yeah, that's the final cut, which I think has a couple extra minutes. I know there's like lots of controversy over the different versions, because I think we don't need to go into that too much.
I have a question. I have three things I kind of want to get to, but we'll see. I don't know, whatever.
No, please.
Okay. So the first one, and it seems really fucking incongruous, is why the hell was there this unicorn? There's a scene where he's like asleep or something, and he dreams of a unicorn. And I didn't see it be relevant at all. And I'm wondering if anybody else had an explanation for that damn unicorn.
I don't know if it's a plot point. I can't honestly tell you that, but I do know Ridley Scott has a thing for unicorns because he also directed Legend. And that exact same kind of shot of the unicorn is in Legend. And so that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
All right.
There's no plot point in the movie that it would be any. There's nothing that it doesn't. Yeah, it made no sense to me. I wrote that down being like unicorn, WTF.
Yeah,
I think Ridley Scott just likes unicorns.
That's okay. So then can I, on a sort of meta, on outside the plot of the film and more of a critique on Hollywood, I see this in movies all the time, particularly horror movies, where the men that get killed, so when Leon gets killed, he gets shot in the head, his head explodes, dies, right? When the women get killed, it is sexualized, right? Yep. And especially in this case, they're wearing bikinis, and you see them lying there in their bikinis covered in blood, or and
designers were two men.
And it's fucking, it's disgusting, and it is very rape culture, and it's like, and so I just wanted to point that out, because again, here I am watching this movie, and it's like, yep, there that is. And and I granted it was whenever 80 something, right?
Yeah, 82.
But it happens. It's the same today, right? You see it in a modern movie where the men go out in a blaze of fucking glory and the women go out
gotta die pretty,
visually, brutally, and it's just, what can I say, disappointing. And I just wanted to point that out because here it is in this movie too.
No, you're 100% correct, and that's a huge reason why I don't work on horror movies anymore.
Yes.
Well, so one of the last things I was going to mention about the movie in general was just the way that they treat women in this movie. There is no good, in quotation marks, like good female character other than Rachel, who seems to have like this, because of the way that she's been built, that she somehow is like more like human. And so the clothing she wears is more masculine. I don't know if anyone noticed that kind of aspect
still an
too.
Object, though.
She still is an object. She still is like subject to rape. She's clearly not. They don't do much better, but just by a little bit, by a hair, they make Rachel better. But all the female characters are treated as beyond just objects. But I think you said, Rob, it's like they're sexualized, and you're meant to see this future of patriarchal structure where women, regardless of what their race or what they're made of, are less.
I would also wager that some of that is a symptom of the time in which both the book was written and the film was made. I'm not saying we're doing a whole lot better now, but like shit was all over the 80s. You see it in similar sci-fi writings of that time, from when Philip K. Dick released this, as just how they treat women in those stories.
Yeah, none of those movies, none of those books have a lot of strong female characters.
Yeah.
Right.
There were a few, it's like mother maiden crone or whatever the phrase is, right? And there was a few, I don't know if that might be a problematic phrase, I don't know.
Madonna whore, I think, is what you're referencing. The
Madonna but there
whore
was also, yes, but there was also like the old woman who looked at the fish scale, I think.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So you can be old and useful cooking noodles or looking at a fish scale, right? Or you can be young and a sex object. And the only other women in the whole fucking movie was in the bar scene. And you like see them for a second, they're interacting. They're not even like really part of the movie. They're just background characters. But they're like this sort of in the middle, no lines, no words, almost presented as almost humans, but just at the bar drinking, and that was in the whole movie.
You're right.
It's interesting about that bar scene. I feel like that's the one time in the movie you do get kind of a glimpse of people who seem to be like slightly above the bottom.
Yes.
But not by, not like rich, but clearly like have some part to play. Like I almost saw it, maybe they don't say this explicitly, but I saw it as kind of like a crime underbelly, like a organized crime of some aspect.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not explicit. But I think when I think of like going to a bar and having to ask for a certain person, to get permission for something or information, I think of, organized crime or something like that.
Sure.
Martin Scorsese movie or something. But did you say you have a third thing?
No,
go for it.
Okay. So we're in the last scene now, right? And there were two parts of this that I found fascinating. One is the replicant, I don't know his name, the villain, Roy Batty. Okay. His hand, he's like, not now. And he sticks a fucking nail through his hand, right? Holy Jesus Christ, literally, right? and then he's reborn, right? And Deckard's running away from him. Deckard gets the fear of God in him, and Roy Batty says, that's the spirit, right? And I thought that was the line that hit me. That's the spirit. The guy just stuck a nail in his arm, He is the embodiment of Christ on earth, the new the new religion coming, and he chases this Deckard away and says, "That's the spirit. Now you feel the Holy fucking Spirit. Now you know what it is to be alive. This is the thing I've been feeling."
I did not.
I like that interpretation.
Yeah.
The nail.
I like that a lot.
I was like, "This is Passion of the Christ right here. Beautiful."
Yeah, I definitely did not think of that. I was thinking of it more of like he wants to feel something, but I like this interpretation better.
I was looking at it from like the chronic illness standpoint of, oh my God, you fucking body, you better not fail me right now. Everything's on the fucking line. Don't you dare shut down on me.
Right.
Like the way, I'll punch my leg if it goes dead or whatever.
Yes. I mean, he's about to die. He's on the cross. He's being crucified. He's being persecuted, and he becomes.
I love that.
Christ.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so then, and this I thought was also very beautiful was that whole last scene where Roy's chasing. Is it Roy Batty? Roy, whatever. Yeah. When he's chasing Deckard. He goes animalistic, literally starts howling as he say he's got no more clothes on. He has turned into a beast. And I thought that was significant. He's been denied his humanity. He has turned into into an animal, has gone so far away, not away, but has to turn into a human, has to turn himself into not a human in order to do what he wants to do here. Well, and it's beautiful because he's howling and it's like.
I noticed that with Pris too when she's attacking Deckard. Like that was actually something I wrote down was that Pris just goes fucking feral, and I love it.
There's a line, I don't know if you caught this. I think when they were also goes back to when Deckard is being briefed by his boss on the different replicants. And I think they refer to, I think it was Zara.
Exactly what you're talking about.
They call her Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast in one.
In one, right. So I feel like you're meant to see like their intellect. Here's where I'm going to tie this into what you said, Rob, is they're like, they have this beauty of being this, not just like a beautiful person, like a woman or whatever, but their cognitive ability is beautiful. But like within them is this beast that can't be controlled. So that's why they're less than human, because they can't control this feral person within them.
Love it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of either of those things.
I love that he had to go animal before he died. It was like a regression into the brainstem, right? More human than fucking human to bring it back.
Yeah.
That lizard brain.
And I think that's the second to final scene where you see, basically they're letting Rachel go. I think is you're meant to see that she gets on the elevator and she leaves. What do you make of that? I mean, I feel like they were trying to insinuate that they could just let her go because she's not going to do anything. I think there's a person who follows him around throughout the movie that's making the little
played by Edward James Olmos. He's another Blade Runner.
And in the book, it's different. Like it's supposed to actually be like someone from the Soviet police that's kind of following him around. It's a little different, but I think he made it seem like, oh, she's already dead, so like we don't have to worry about her. He's vouched for her being dead.
Well, because the replicants all have an automatically shortened lifespan, which is never explicitly said that extends to Rachel as well, but it is kind of implied that she's going to die in like 4 years anyway.
Right. So the idea is just let her have her brief life.
Also, another line I thought was significant was when it was pretty early on, but she wanted to escape by going north, right? And already I had been thinking about how this is a slave society, and that north for some reason is still where you escape to, right? It was all very underground railroad. We'll escape to the north,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're in LA. It makes more sense to go north.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, geographically logical, but the language is loaded.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And like even now, when you hear people talking about like trying to escape the drag and trans bans, they're talking about like going to Canada.
Right.
So
Right.
north, I guess, is just our automatic egress for everything.
Yeah. I also immediately thought when they were saying north, like, oh, they're going to go to Canada or some northern territory where there's more progressiveness or whatever that means in this society, which doesn't feel like very much. There isn't really. Yeah. So this also
it seems more like it's a global thing rather than like a country thing.
Right. It feels like Tyrell is not the U.S. company. It's just like the global capital.
Yeah.
Being. I don't know if you had anyone. So the only sort of like last thought question I was thinking is, what does this society and its relevance, which is kind of like my opening question of it, how it being still relevant, like, is this a warning? I don't want to, because we're already talking about like, oh, Elon Musk is gonna take us to Mars or whatever. Obviously, he's mostly full of shit. But
if I recall specifically, like the terms of that are basically indentured servitude to pay off your trip up there.
Right, which is basically this movie. So, so in my mind, I'm thinking like, we already have the megacity. We already have the cops that are basically acting. We already have the corporations, very few of them controlling everything. The only thing we don't have is this AI type of person. We have like these chat bots and these things, of course, but I don't know.
I think
Perhaps I'm
that
scared.
Science fiction has always been a commentary on the time in which it is written, but these issues have existed long before we got here. We're just seeing them in their more modern format, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's so much a warning as it is a commentary on the time that it was written. It's just still very appropriate now.
Yeah.
I don't see a warning against capitalism necessarily. Except to the extent that what I'm about to say is subsumed under capitalism, which is that I see the warning in, obviously the point of this movie is about humanity and ethics and ultimately it's going to be what is consciousness. When do you decide that this entity is sentient, can feel pain, right? That is a warning we are going to have to confront probably before I die, right? But I don't see any critique or criticism or warning against capitalism, because it seems to be structured like a slave society. So it doesn't apply to the present in the way that I would like it to. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point about like perceiving when another creature or person experiences pain or whatever, because that's actually a current issue, especially in the medical community, is debating on like if different races feel and experience physical pain differently than others. And that's something we still haven't really fully eradicated. No, there's a common misconception that is taught in medicine that Black women specifically don't experience pain the same way as white women. And so their pain is radically, today, now, their pain is radically undertreated. They are not taken seriously. It's disgusting.
Incredible.
And like that's actually how we got the modern field of gynecology, was this horrible, horrible white doctor experimenting on Black women, performing gynecological surgeries on them without anesthesia, because there was this conception that Black women didn't experience pain. And
so I just Googled this. I just Googled this, and the first thing that came up was an article written by the University of Virginia's Public Policy Institute saying Black Americans are systematically undertreated for pain. Why? and this I'm going to read this because this blows my mind,
Yeah.
and I mean, I'm not
One of my like pet causes
surprised.
is like medical equality and medical justice because everything is so fucked up in the medical system.
Wow, this is. I mean, again, like, I'm not surprised, but I'm also surprised. Like, I shouldn't be surprised.
There's
Like
another TikToker, Sydney Says Things, and she's got some like, I don't know, never mind, I probably shouldn't. Well, the point is that her doctors are not listening to her at all. And they're saying, you're fine, you're fine. And they send her home with nothing. And she's not, she's not fine.
Yeah. This is a huge issue specifically with women and people that are assigned female at birth within the medical system, is that their symptoms are disregarded. Like, instead of being diagnosed with hysteria, now it's anxiety and depression. So like, people that are assigned female at birth are just blown off and they're told that they're fine. But Black women especially, that's part of the reason that they have such a high mortality rate in childbirth, is because of this misconception about how they handle pain and how their bodies process pain.
I mean, race is a construct so that they could inflict pain upon the lesser, in quotes, lesser races. So it's again, like, it doesn't surprise me, but it's hard to not just be shocked by that. But yeah, I don't know.
So one more thing, and this is again meta Hollywood bullshit.
Please, right? I love meta Hollywood bullshit.
The Deckard and Rachel have known each other for fucking what? Not even a day, 2 days or something. And he comes in, he's like, "Do you love me? I love you. Do you trust me?
I know.
Trust you."
My God.
Oh my God, that is not how fucking love works. And nothing pisses me off more when these two characters who have just been through a traumatic experience are in love and willing to sacrifice everything for each other. It's fucking bullshit. And it happens all the time. I fucking hate it.
Agreed.
Do you love me? No, I don't even know you.
Well, let me pause
Why
something.
is she still in his apartment? Like, sorry. This dude just like assaulted me. I'm just going to hang out. Just like, no, absolutely not.
Well, I completely agree with your. I think that's like a trope in movies that's always crazy. Like, of course, in like rom-coms, I think you see a lot is this thing. But what I was gonna say is, I think that Rachel is unsure of her own feelings, that she's now like, they seem to like come to her in a different way they would come to a human, because her brain is not real. And so I only thing I could think of is that he's almost, what's the right word? I don't want to say he's gaslighting her, but he is kind of.
Yeah, manipulating. Yeah.
He's manipulating her for his own gain, which is unfortunately not the case in the book. She's like offering help, and he's like, "No, I don't want you to help me." And then like he does.
I feel like you love me, or I'm going to throw you against the wall again.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
That was cringe as shit. And you know that at the time, that at the time that was like romantic, right?
Yeah.
And it's even, presented even today, you would see it probably a lesser form in a movie today and be like, this.
Well, that's why you have all these like Harley Quinn and Joker like romance shippers, when that is like one of the most toxic media relationships in any canon anywhere.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
I was just talking about the Joker recently. I'm working on an episode on the Joker, which I feel like I should have done by now, and I need to do. I don't personally like the Joker, the movie.
I was disappointed.
I haven't seen the new one.
That's a different podcast.
Yes, different podcast.
I was disappointed.
Yes, but let's see. Does either of you have any like last final thoughts?
I thought it was interesting, just as a Philip K. Dick thing, like him and one of his wives were investigated by the FBI because she was a socialist and heavily politically active. I just thought that was cool.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. In like the 50s. Yeah.
I hate in sci-fi movies that are older that they can't imagine the digitization of everything. right? And so this is just the time or whatever, but all the lights are neon. Fuck, why aren't there cameras everywhere? Those kinds of things make it really hard for me to watch an old sci-fi, because there would be
But that kind
cameras.
of surveillance state didn't really exist then as much. And
yeah.
I don't know that like anybody in 1982 could visualize like what our technology looks like right now.
No, I know, and that's yes, of course. It makes it hard for me to watch something old, because the digital revolution has fundamentally changed the landscape of everything, in my opinion. So problems that exist in the future that were written in the past aren't even real anymore. All you'd have to do is make a call on your cell phone, but nobody even has a fucking cell phone in this movie.
I think that some sci-fi writers writing a little later than 1968 that were writing in the 80s, I think started bringing in some of that. Mm-hmm. Like I think of like William Gibson novels. I feel like the idea of everything is being watched is more interesting. Yeah. I do find it more interesting because that's what we live under. Like it's easier to imagine it, right? I think is also what you're saying. But I don't think I had any. I don't have any last comments.
Did we lose Claire?
I see her. I'll see. Perhaps. Oh, I see her coming back.
Oh, it froze on me.
All good. I was just saying that I didn't have any final notes or anything, but it sounds like you kind of popped in your final thoughts. Did you have any final thoughts, Claire? Oh. Might have frozen for her.
I wasn't sure if you were asking me a question, and then like the audio is now very garbled for me.
Oh, yeah. I would just say asking if you had any final entries, anything left that you wanted to bring up before we close out.
I think I hit like most of my notes. This was a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, no, I find generally, usually I'll watch the movie with notes and then watch it just kind of enjoying it. And now when I watch movies, I feel like it would probably be insufferable to like watch a movie as I'm like talking and thinking of the things that are happening about it. But I guess that's a fun thing to do when watching movies. But
the only other thing, I'm sorry, but
go ahead.
When he's chasing down the I think it's the first the woman with the snake tattoo, right?
Yes.
And she is very clearly fearing for her life, and he's chasing her down to shoot her. And I don't understand how you can watch a human fear for their life and not consider them human, right? And he's just chasing her with the intent to kill her. And I think it's another sort of evolution in his understanding of what he's doing. Is this, she's like cowering behind a bunch of people, obviously terrified. And it's like, that's a human. I'm sorry, I don't give a fuck what's inside you. That's a human being right there,
Yeah, it's hard to he should be he shouldn't be able to, he should be able to separate or understand what they are.
Deckard is the one that is not human in that situation. He is the one that has lost all empathy, all understanding of what it means to be human.
100% agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Rob and Claire, thank you both for coming on and talking about Blade Runner. It's been awesome.
Absolutely.
That's super fun.
All right. Well, everyone, you can, of course, check out the podcast on your platform of choice, and we will catch you next week.